Kia ora koutou. We'll just open the meeting. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi a ke ana te atukura, he tau, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei Māori ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Te iwi o rangatane tēnā koutou, te kunahiro papauia tēnā koutou, e ngā mana e ngā reo, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. So welcome everybody to Community Development Committee meeting the 17th of March. I'd also like to note that it's St Patrick's Day, so Fulcher to anybody who has Irish heritage. So we will start by just explaining that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed to Council's YouTube channel, and it will be available on Council's website after the meeting. And we will just go through health and safety. So if you do hear a fire alarm, please leave the site immediately by the nearest fire exit, one behind Leone, one over here, following the administrators, and assemble at the clock tower in Te Maraeohine. Smoking is prohibited. There's a defibrillator located front of house on the ground floor, and if there are any incidents or near misses, please report to the committee administrator. Thank you. Councillors, please say your name before speaking if it's not called out, and presenters also, if you could say your name for the purposes of those following along at home. Thank you. So we will start with the apologies. I have an apology from the Mayor on Council Business, from Daniel Harris, and from Brent Barrett, also on Council Business. Are there any other apologies? No. So I'll move the apologies. Seconded Councillor Bowen. Is there any comment? No. Then we'll vote, please. And that is carried 14-4, none against, no abstentions. So I have no notification of additional items. Are there any other additional items? Late items? No. Okay, we will move on then to declarations of interest, if any. Councillor Harpeter.
Yes, I've got an interest in item number 7, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Also, item 7, I've previously submitted to or made submissions on the draft alcohol policy, and also to note that I'll be co-presenting on item number 9, which of course the Safety Advisory Board plan.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just note that I have an interest in item 7 as a member of the DLC, but I don't believe it's a conflict, and I'll be entering the item with an open mind.
Thank you. Thank you all. Those conflicts have been noted. So we'll move on to public comment. Is there any public comment? Any member of the public wishing to make comment? No. So that brings us then to the presentation by Palmerston North Youth Council. So if I could welcome down Grace, John and Lucas, who are going to present on behalf of the Palmerston North Youth Council. So, kia ora koutou. So we'll be using the traffic light system, which is a 10-minute system, which you probably had explained to you. So 7 minutes on green, 2 on amber and 1 on red. And then if you're happy to take questions, I expect there may well be some questions. So when you're ready. And just make sure your microphones are on. Green light should be showing.
Testing.
Yep, perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Council, for welcoming us here today, and thank you, Chair, for your invitation. So we're here as part of, or as representing Youth Council, and before we get into it, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm John. I'm the Secretary for the Palmerston North Youth Council. This is Grace, who is the Chair of the Youth Council, and this is Lucas, who is our Treasurer. So before we get into it, I think it's pretty essential to explain what is our purpose as Youth Council. So really, our purpose can be summarised as 3 key points. It's looking to develop opportunities for youth. It's looking to act as a bridge between youth and council, to provide an opportunity for consulting, for advising, and to really make sure that youth is engaged with the civil process. And it's looking to make sure that youth are connected and that Youth Council can role model and act as service for the city and for the youth of Palmerston North. So the first thing I will touch on is our projects. So this is a pretty key part of Youth Council as we see this as a massive opportunity to not only engage in civil education, but also let youth get engaged across the board. So what I believe our first contention, or I guess our first project which we want to discuss, is the project of Pizza and Politics. Now, I found this to be a pretty awesome event. I had the opportunity to MC it, and really what we see Pizza and Politics is as a forum for youth and for upcoming candidates to engage with one another in a more casual environment. Now, I personally, and I hope no one takes this to offense, finds civil education or engaging with politics a bit formal, a bit tedious, and sometimes a bit boring. And I believe that's a reflection of quite a few youth. I hope no one takes that to offense, but I believe that's the general reflection. However, Pizza and Politics is meant to act as a forum and act as an opportunity for students and for teenagers to engage with politics and to engage with the upcoming candidates to discuss things they feel are important. And out of this event, we often see that the teenagers are just as opinionated and have just as much to contribute to as the candidates. And we see this as a pretty awesome opportunity for these two parties to engage with one another, with pizza being a fantastic binder between the two parties. So along with this, we have quite a few other projects which we want to discuss, and most of them focusing around the idea of consultation and Youth Council acting as a funnel between youth and council and what's really happening in the region. One such example was the Wastewater Consultation we had in 2020. Now, I'm sure all of you are aware of what the Wastewater Project is. Of course, you're leading it, but pretty much we saw this as a fantastic opportunity for youth to find out what is happening in Palmerston North. Obviously, the Wastewater Project is a massive thing, and it's something which is going to impact us years and years into the future, and we feel that it's important to have the youth voice involved with that. And the purpose of this project was to provide that opportunity for connection, for consideration, and for consulting. The same can really be said for quite a few projects, such as meeting the councillors. Now, I guess I'll pose the question of, in 2019, were any councillors involved with this project? Yeah, awesome. That's fantastic to see. And what we found is that this project was not only, and this can be said to quite a few of our projects, where this project wasn't only open to Youth Council, but it really was an open invitation to all youth. And the purpose of it was to, meet our councillors. Once again, it's acting as this forum for the youth of Palmerston North to engage in civil education, usually in a casual environment or in an environment which is better suited for youth and tends to put forward their interests most. And we found that Youth Council is usually a pretty successful way to achieve this, because when it is headed by youth, we tend to have a pretty good idea of what youth see as the ideal environment to engage with civil education, to engage with council, and to engage with upcoming issues. Another example was our city centre play. Now, this was a pretty awesome project I found myself, because not only did it act as a consultation for what youth want to see happening in the city centre, and we saw the result of that being that basketball hoop, which I've been told heaps of people are making use of, and it's really, an awesome positive. It also acted as a way for youth to just engage with, to get an idea of what is happening and what planning a city is like. Now, this is something we don't usually get to see, say, within high schools or within our normal environments, and we once again saw this project act as a way for people to not only engage in civil education, but engage in what it's like to to plan cities, to get an idea of what it's like to engineer, and really the thinking behind that. So it's that expansion of, I guess, not only job opportunities as well, and seeing the possibility of where that might lead, but in general, it's broadening the borders of youth across Palmerston North. And finally, there's just a summary of the annual budget meeting we had in 2019, which once again comes back to that idea, such as what we saw with the wastewater project, where it lets youth engage and see what is happening and act as a consultation there. So really, that all relates back to that purpose of us being able to engage and being able to act as a bridge between City Council and youth, which we think is a pretty awesome, goal, a pretty awesome purpose. The next thing we want to touch on is initiatives. So the first point of discussion we have here is what we did during lockdown last year. Now, I'm sure we're all aware that lockdown was a pretty unusual period, not only for us, not only for Palmerston North, but really all across the world. But of course, this sort of event is very challenging for youth, getting pretty much being disconnected from high school, being disconnected from what is normal can be very challenging for people, very challenging for youth. And what we found during Level 4 is providing that sort of connection, that sort of sentiment, where we were able to do daily takeovers, have a and really keep the discussion going there. What it means to be healthy, and really let people still be engaged with the rest of the world. And we continue to forward our purpose of letting youth engage with civil education. One example I see up there is we had a lot of education and a lot of materials focusing around the Black Lives Matter movement, and we tried to act as a vessel of unbiased coverage on that, so youth have the opportunity to engage with that through Youth Council. Another example, and one which once again I think it was a pretty awesome initiative, was our videos around general election. So once again, this is forwarding our purpose of letting youth engage with upcoming council and what is happening in civil education. So it acts as that funnel. And as you can see there, if I draw some numbers to some figures, we can see that 6,326 people engage with our local election video. So we would say that's a pretty massive success, right? Where we really forward the sentiment of your voice, your choice, and really setting up the idea of how important it is to be engaged with civil education. Once again, just bringing a highlight to this, I think one of the fantastic things of Youth Council is set from the minds of youth. So we're able to forward these sort of sentiments from the youth's eyes. Just to give an idea of context, we did the same sort of idea in 2019, and we saw that the figure was 1,355. So we can see that as time goes on, our engagement is only increasing, which is a pretty awesome thing to see. Another example was our Youth Week and our Music Week. So once again, the idea of this week was really to focus on students being able to come out of the shell and express what they believe in, and do it in a safe environment. So whether that being sharing some skills, sharing some skills, and really getting comfortable with what's happening and going outside your comfort zones. Another such example was, once again, Youth Week in 2019, and yeah, that really summarizes a few key initiatives we've done. The next area is opportunities for development. Now, I'm sure our scholarships are one of the more known initiatives, or one of the more known projects we do in Youth Council, and that's because it's a pretty massive success, and we see a lot of benefit come out of that, where what we're doing is supporting local youth in achieving, whether it be high-quality sporting goals, and with a high-quality sporting goal, starting their own initiatives inside school, in the community, and really expanding the possibilities for youth. The fantastic thing of scholarships is to make sure that people can achieve their goals, achieve major projects without being hindered by the finances as a result of that. And we see that community develop through our scholarships as a pretty essential part of doing that. And we will also touch later on a few people who were able to make use of that, and it's an interesting thing to relate back of. Oh dear. Interesting thing to relate back on. Okay, I'll make my closing statements soon. So, with all that being said, I'll just touch on our goals for 2021, where it's really continuing to forward our purpose through our goals. So it's maximizing engagement with youth and making sure we can make the most out of that. So I thank our councillors for our time. I thank Madam Chair, and I'll pass it back to Madam Chair for any questions.
Thank you very much. That was a great run through. Fantastic. You're happy to take some questions now?
Yes, please.
So the Deputy Mayor is first in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to you three for coming in. The presentation was very good, very thorough, and it's obviously a very busy time for the Youth Council, so that's really great. I have got a couple of questions. Is your main, I guess, demographic of the young people that you're engaging with still largely those in high school?
Yes. So basically, we have a recruitment stage where we have a mailing list when we recruit. So we've got all the schools, we've got all the obviously the Mass University and UCOL. But this year is our first year where we had someone from a tertiary education place. So we've got someone called Fatima from Massey who's joined us. She's actually the Musa president, and that's our first, out of high school person who's just joined us this year since 2018.
That's awesome. And when you conclude a recruitment drive or whatever you call that process, are you still doing a retreat or some sort of development opportunities to invest in the youth councillors you've got and sort of bring people together?
Sorry, can you rephrase that question?
Okay, so in the past there's been it was called a retreat for youth councillors, and it was often a couple of days where they went off-site, out of town somewhere, and had some professional development or development opportunities given to the youth council. Does that still happen?
Yes. So we actually go to Festival of the Future annually, and that event that we go to usually sparks up a lot of inspiration for us, and then we come back and bring it back to our city. Yeah, so that still goes on.
Thank you. And then I've just got one final question, if that's okay. It's just with your campaign, I guess, that you ran through the general election to get young people engaged in that. I wondered how your engagement was, considering that probably a lot of the young people you were engaging with were too young to actually vote. Was there still a lot of interest in just participating in learning and, the sessions and those sorts of things, or how did that work upon reflection?
Oh, most certainly. So you are right in saying that there was a decent amount of our demographic who was a bit under the voting age, but I think a sentiment which is reflected through youth councils, the importance of starting a passion for civil education when young. Really, if you're only aiming for the 18-year-old demographic, then it only promotes that idea of the sort of exclusivity of voting, and really it sets up the idea where if you're a bit young below that, you're not particularly relevant to civil education. We really want to promote the idea that even if you can't vote, it's super important to be aware of what's happening, and it sets up that idea in future elections when you are old enough, you get the opportunity, you have the background knowledge to get involved.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Dingwall.
Apologies for jumping in the queue late. So in terms of the Youth Council, how are you engaging with the wider youth? As an example, I'm Pacifica, but I can't really speak for all of Pacifica. How are you engaging with the wider youth?
So we actually have a mailing list whenever we do recruitment with all the schools involved, all the little groups involved, and we send out all our applications there. But we also engage peer-to-peer, so via our social media, our Instagram page and our Facebook page. And we're connected, for example, we're connected with the Amanaki STEM Academy, so whatever we do, we pass it on to them to share to their young people, which are a majority of them are Pasifika. We do the same to the Puhoro Academy, and we just make sure we touch base on, all the little groups there. We're definitely developing it more since past years, but yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your presentation. Civics Education, what does your particular school, what's the curriculum, and what do you do regarding the education? What do they put on for you?
Yeah, in our schools, we sort of found civics education was sort of lacking, so that's why we've had events like Pizza and Politics, and we're trying to find engagement because at the schools, we know it's not an inherent part of the curriculum and it's not taught in any of the NCEA classes.
So that's why you're doing it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that answers.
Just a quick question from me. If you had to give us the sort of, top 3 wish list from Youth Council for youth in the city that you thought council could assist with, what would it be?
A wish list. I think one thing I would want was just kind of just engagement from the city council to the youth, like primarily, so hand to hand. So, I mean, as in the city council. Sorry.
Let's see. I guess another thing we might have on our wish list, maybe just for the youth, like more. Here, if I look here. I guess maybe just like a space for more discussion. So like, yeah, it's sort of as Grace was saying, just more involvement, like to come down, speak to the youth, and maybe be like more transparency about like what goes on within City Council, and then just getting involved with the projects we're doing, really.
If I can add on to that, I believe I think 2 weeks ago, we had the pleasure of having three councillors join us for one of our meetings. 4? Oh, I'm awfully sorry, 4. And we found that, and the council itself found it to be a fantastic opportunity to engage with youth further. So really, I guess one of the top things of our wish list is to be able to engage with the members of the council further, because it's further building that bridge. It's letting us see what is happening. It's giving us an eye on what is happening, and it also provides us an opportunity to, I guess, provide our own thoughts, provide our own ideas, and I guess give our own view on what is happening.
Brilliant, thank you. Just got one last question from Councillor Michelad, which I'm allowing since he is now the youngest councillor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for the wonderful presentation and for the work that you guys are doing. I think my question had been answered. It was in relation to engagement, youth engagement, and what we can do as a council to make sure that you experience or how we can improve youth participation in civics and also during elections. So it has been answered. Thank you.
Anything you want to add about engagement? You feel you've covered that?
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, I think we've covered that.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, look, thank you very much for taking the time out to come and present to us today. I think it's been very useful for councillors and hopefully set up some further engagement between elected members here and yourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to move that the presentation be received for information. Seconded Councillor Bowen, and I will open up for any comment. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a brief comment because I've, over my time on council, have had the privilege of working with the Youth Council through various years, and it's really great to see the presentation today because I really genuinely believe that our Youth Council have gone from strength to strength over the years. Right now there's a very clear purpose, there's some strong engagement both with a direction that they're chasing, but also their community. And there's some really great outcomes that have been reported on today from what was a very constrained environment last year. So it's really positive. I really love seeing the youth-led direction. It is something that is decided and established among the Youth Council around what they're wanting to achieve, and that's what they're chasing. It's not direction from this chamber as to what they should be doing, and that is genuine youth participation. So really, really great to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo some of the comments made by our Deputy Mayor, and also to acknowledge that sometimes it is difficult for us to sort of step into the youth space and try and engage with that. I mean, I'm, up until last month, was the second youngest councillor here, but I also have children who are their age. So it's been, sometimes when you're sitting in those spaces, you sit there and you're like, oh, am I too old for this? But actually, I think the big thing that we need to be trying to do and achieve in the future is to kind of bridge that gap between the youth and everybody else, you know, and trying to have a bit more of that collective discussion and engagement and connection, because it isn't youth versus older generation. It isn't, you know, I'm a mum, so therefore I can't talk to the youth. We need to sort of step away from that, and I think you're doing a great job in trying to bridge that gap. So I just want to say well done.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've popped in just to add a personal thanks specifically to the three of you, because I know on top of your commitment at Youth Council and all holding executive roles, that's no small thing. But John and Grace have both been youth speakers at our commemorative events, and Lucas is doing sterling work on the Creative Communities Fund, actually in the middle of a quite intensive interview period at the moment. So there is certainly no question that you are putting a great deal of personal time and effort into your civic duties, and it is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to echo that thanks. We appreciate all the voluntary effort that goes into trying to organise a youth council and coming up with the strategic direction and plan. So thank you, appreciated. So on that note, we will vote to receive the presentation. And that's carried, 15 votes for, none against, no abstentions. Thank you. So we will move on and confirm the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the 10th of December 2020. I'm happy to move that the minutes be confirmed as a true and correct record. Seconded, Councillor Bowen. Is there any comment? No? Then we will vote, please, to receive the minutes. And that is carried, 13 votes for and 2 abstentions. So the next item will be item 8 on page 63, which is the Welcoming Communities Advisory Group Plan, endorsement by Council. And I'd like to welcome Joanne Ransom and Steph Velvin, who's made a special guest appearance for us, to present the plan. So welcome, and thank you, Steph, for coming in when you're really on leave. Over to you.
So it is my great pleasure to present the new Welcoming Plan for 2020 to 23, which has been developed by the Welcoming Communities Advisory Group, members of whom are in the gallery today. The group is facilitated by the Welcoming Communities Coordinator, Steph Velvin, who is here today to give you some context to the plan and answer any questions that you have. The plan is brought to Council for endorsement, as this will help significantly when the next accreditation application is made. There is one matter that I do need to clarify. On reflection, it wasn't clear in the report. The Welcoming Communities program is still a program and not technically core business. So this means that Council's contribution to the Welcoming Communities Advisory Group and implementation of this group plan is contingent on endorsement of support for this role through the 10-year plan process. I'd like to hand over to Steph now.
Thanks, Jo. Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou. I'm Stephanie Velvin, the Welcoming Communities Coordinator. So I'll just provide a little bit of background about the Welcoming Communities program and how we developed this plan. So Welcoming Communities is an Immigration New Zealand-led initiative designed to build stronger connections between local residents and newcomers, primarily migrants, former refugees and international students. with the idea that those connections then make the settlement process easier for those newcomers, which therefore creates more resilient, prosperous communities. It's part of a larger international network of programs, so there's a similar program in Australia called Welcoming Cities, and there's similar programs in the US and Canada. So at the national level, there's a lot of interaction between those program leaders. It commenced in 2017 and was piloted for 2 years across 5 locations, including 9 councils right throughout the country. And we were one of those early adopters, part of the pilot there. In late 2019, as a result of the evaluation that went alongside the pilot, Immigration New Zealand made the decision to roll out the program. And so there's the opportunity now for up to 30 new councils to come on board between now and 2024. So the first of those, there will be 4 new councils announced next week, I believe. Hopefully, I think including some of our neighbouring councils, so that will be really exciting. So some key components of the program: it's accreditation based, measured against a national outcomes framework, or the Welcoming Communities Standard. We gained accreditation, the first level, as a committed welcoming community in 2019, early 2019. Late 2019, sorry. And then we gained the second stage, established welcoming community, in June last year. And we were one of the first councils in New Zealand to gain that accreditation, which was really exciting. Another key component is the knowledge sharing between the coordinators across the country. So there are regular Zoom meetings where the coordinators from each council get together and share good ideas, talk about what's working, talk about challenges that are being faced in the community and ways to resolve those. And those meetings are really valuable. And there's also a lot of information provided from MB around best practice internationally, guidance in terms of how to evaluate the activities that are happening, how to measure outcomes, and so on. A third component of the program is that it is locally driven. So obviously it's coordinated by council, but with huge buy-in from the community groups and other government agencies locally. And so that is represented by the advisory group, which is talked about in the plan, and obviously who have developed the plan. So this particular plan was a long time coming because of COVID last year. So originally we had intended to present it in 2020 for endorsement, but these things happen. So it was developed throughout a series of workshops with the advisory group in late 2019, early 2020, and also endorsed by Rangatane as well. And it sets out really how the community will work towards the third stage of accreditation, which is the advanced level. And with the idea being that that is achieved in this time frame, and that would make us one of the first councils to reach that third level of accreditation as well. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Steph. That's great. Jo, did you want to say something more?
I just wanted to say, and Steph's being a bit modest here, but I know that this plan and the work of our community are held up internationally as an example of how to do things well. So, and I've seen PowerPoints from international presentations. So I just, we should be very proud of the work that this advisory group is achieving under Steph's coordination.
Thanks, Jo. Councillors, I'll open for questions. First of all, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Joan and Steph. I've got a couple of questions. The first is around the aspect of inclusive leadership, and I know that the document opens with some statements around engagement with rangitane as mana whenua. But I just noted it doesn't really touch on the kind of co-governance or appointments, and I wondered whether if there was a reason for not going into the detail of that, because I would have thought it strengthens the statements in terms of providing examples of working together in decision making, which is obviously a part of that. Yeah, is there a reason it wasn't included? I wondered whether it was a political thing or...
Just to clarify, you mean in terms of council as a whole? Or
Yeah, as an organisation, I guess, examples of that partnership.
Right. No, not a reason, that it hasn't been included. We talked about it in a lot of detail in our accreditation application. So perhaps when read together with that, it would become a bit clearer, but yeah.
Okay. With the advisory group action plan, it talks about the welcome packs that are distributed, and I wondered if you could talk a bit more about what's included in those and how sort of far-reaching they are.
Sure, yeah. The welcome pack has a booklet which has about 10 sort of key topics about day-to-day living in the city. It has some specific tips for newcomers in the first sort of weeks and months that they might be experiencing the city, and some local insights as well. So things like how to find a job, some local tips around that, rubbish collection, that sort of day-to-day thing that you need to know and that you might not find easily online before arrival. So there's a booklet around that. There is a card which is sort of in a bingo style, which has various activities which would encourage newcomers to get out, see the city, see the attractions that we have, and also make some connections with locals. And there's also a little card in there with some local slang and sayings and things like that, in a folder, and they're distributed at the iSite, the library and the Multicultural Centre, and so they all have the opportunity to add in their own resources as well in there.
Cool, thank you. And then just my final question was, under the civic engagement and participation, there wasn't anything specific around youth council or the opportunity for young people to participate at that level. And I just wondered if that was a conscious decision or if it was just perhaps not thought of.
No, again, not a conscious decision to exclude that reference. We were trying to keep it quite succinct and again focused on the newcomer groups that this program is designed to cater for. So we've mentioned a couple of groups that relate to that sector. It would be hard to mention all the groups that would fall under this category.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steph, I've got a couple of questions. One is noting that under each sub-outcome there are quite a lot of new activities and initiatives in the plan. Are we adequately resourced to be able to deliver on those initiatives in the time period of the plan?
So the current level of resourcing that we've had over the last few years, the last 12 months in particular, has been sufficient to deliver at that level. I can't speak to what what is planned going forward, because that, as Joe mentioned, is a 10-year plan decision. So we would in order to get to that advanced stage, we would need to maintain the current level of resourcing. We definitely would struggle to deliver on this plan in this time frame if that was to drop.
So the funding in the LTP, we believe, would be sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Because obviously endorsing the plan today, we need to know what we're committing ourselves to in terms of resourcing. So with the planned resourcing, it's achievable. Okay, thank you. And then you've said hopefully we can reach advanced within the time frame. Are there any other councils on advanced at the moment?
No.
Okay, that's a goal then. Thank you. Councillor Butt, you had some questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Steph, for your beautiful report. after getting a certain accreditation or the next level, you have described a few of the international programs of the same kind. Will we be eligible to automatically get that certification, or you have to apply for that? And do you have any plans to go for that?
So there isn't sort of an ultimate international accreditation, so each country has their own accreditation program, so they sort of sit next to each other. So if we were to get that advanced accreditation under the Welcoming Communities program here, that would be comparable to a similar accreditation overseas. So we wouldn't need to then apply for something, above that.
All right, thank you.
Any more questions, councillors? No. Okay. Well then, thank you very much, Steph, in particular, for coming in and for all your work, and for Jo for presenting the report. So I'm happy to move that we endorse the Welcoming Communities Advisory Group Plan 2020 to 2023 that has been included as attachment 1 to the memorandum entitled Welcoming Communities Advisory Group Plan Endorsement by Council, presented to the Community Development Committee on 17th of March 2021. Seconded, Deputy Mayor. Is there anybody wishing to make comment? Councillor Michelad.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks very much, Steph and the team, for such a beautiful presentation. And I just want to probably highlight how, encourage all of us in supporting this motion, because in order for us to be a well-connected city and a vibrant, inclusive city, what has been outlined here is fairly works towards the goals that we are seeking to achieve and wanting to be an international leader in making sure that our city remains, a place that we can all make refugees and migrants feel welcomed. So I just want to encourage all the councillors to move this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to echo the comments from Councillor Michelad as well. I want to say a massive thank you to Steph. This is a huge amount of work that's been going on for a few years now. Some of the things that have happened within the Welcoming Communities has had great impacts with the community already. It's already done quite a lot. So even as an example, with the city welcomes that we've done, I actually ended up attending one when I first got onto council, and I learned some stuff that I didn't know about Palmy after living here for 10 years. Things like the the hitching post that's on the square. I'd walk past that little bit of wood every day for years and never knew what that was. And then yesterday, there were a group of students walking around Te Marae-o-Hine, learning about different parts of Te Marae-o-Hine, and I was able to say, oh yes, have you seen this hitching post? So massive thank you to all the work that you've been doing, and for helping to welcome everyone into this into Palmy. It's great.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, would also echo the comments around recognising the staff that have been involved in this mammoth piece of work, which is really exciting for the city. The accreditation as a whole, I think, is actually one that is really set apart from many others that are presented to us. And, in my time on council, we've had various conversations around various accreditations and, I guess, elements that we should adopt to get these labels on our city. And the Welcoming Communities one is really one that crosses over many areas and is quite a broad but in-depth accreditation, and, in my view, really negates the need for a focus on other pieces of work around accreditation and various other labels. So I think this is one that we should really continue to support and continue to put a good focus on. And the other thing which Councillor Dingwall just sort of touched on was this accreditation gives us the opportunity to tell our story and market the city in a way outside of traditional media. And so I think that's a really great opportunity on its own, let alone the value that the work to get the accreditation brings as well. So again, well done to the staff who have been involved in this, and look forward to continuing to support that. And I think by the question that you asked, Councillor Johnson, with a bit of pace to see if we can possibly be the first to get to the end. So yes, I'm happy to support this.
Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies for lateness, just tidying up some other council business. Look, I just want to also congratulate the team. To Steph, Joe, but it's more than that. It's the committee, all the different parts of the wheel that make it all work. And I just want to acknowledge our government ministry colleagues that are here. And we're doing this on Race Relations Day too, which I think is really quite topical. It celebrates the welcoming nature of our city, which has actually always been there, but now we're highlighting that more. It shows the inclusive nature of the city and celebrating all the diversity that we have and all the different ethnic communities, no matter which part of the globe you come from. Also, it's worth noting the many different groups that are included there, from economic groups to language partners, to the Chamber of Commerce, to obviously the Multicultural Council, but also other different ministries and Red Cross, etc. So I think it's a tremendous story for the city, and one we must endorse. To me, it's a no-brainer, so please support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just add my own comments. I mean, I am delighted to be able to endorse this plan today. I think it's really important that we, as a city, tell people how proud we are of being a multicultural city, that we're proud to be a refugee resettlement city, that we are a welcoming community that welcomes everybody here. And this is very important for us to declare in a definitive way. And so that's why I'm very pleased to have the plan come today to be endorsed. But I think it's a significant contributor to our strategic goal of being a connected and safe community. And it's one that I'm very, very pleased to have coming before the committee today. So I don't think it's going to be at all controversial. I will ask you to vote. Thank you. And that's carried unanimously, 15 votes for, none against, no abstentions. Thank you, and thank you to staff. So our next item is item 7, which is on page 15, and that's the deliberations on the draft local alcohol policy. Page 15, sorry. So I'd like to invite Julie MacDonald to present, please, and perhaps Peter? Yes, and Peter Ridge, thank you. When you're ready, Julie, thank you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. We are pleased to bring back the draft local alcohol policy deliberations report for your consideration. We've been asked by the Chair to take you through a short presentation, which Peter's going to go through to describe and remind you all of the long journey that we've been on to get to this point. It's a really, really complicated piece of work that is constrained by legislation and a number of other considerations. So bear with us, we realise it is complicated. And so we're happy to take questions, but we'll start with the presentation.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much. So there's a few slides here just to take you through. We're not going to go into the detail of the report to repeat that. We'll take that as read. But as Julie said, there's a few items which we think are probably worth reminding of before we go any further. So I'm aware this is a topic which has a lot of jargon, a lot of acronyms, so I thought it would be useful just to refresh people's minds on what these terms mean. So in regards to alcohol licensing, we often refer to on-licensed premises, off-licensed premises. The on-licensed premises are those that can sell alcohol for consumption on-site. Examples are bars, hotels, restaurants, cafes, and so on. Off-licensed premises are those that can sell alcohol for consumption off-premises, such as bottle stores, supermarkets, and grocery stores. It also includes remote cellars, of which we have, I believe, 1 or 2. Club licensed premises are those that can sell alcohol to members of the club or their guests for consumption within the club rooms, such as RSAs and sports clubs. It's important to remember these aren't nightclubs, as people might colloquially refer to them. These are actual licensed clubs. A term we've often used in the report is Class 1 restaurants. I wanted to highlight this one in particular because it is not a common term. This is a category of on-licensed premises, which refers to a restaurant that has a bar area that can be operated as a tavern. So that's quite a distinct group. We have about 5 of those in the city. Then there's these 2 acronyms that we will keep referring to. The DLC is the District Licensing Committee. So every council has a DLC that receives applications for licences and then can either issue the licence or reject the application. They also deal with manager certificates for duty managers. And then ALA is the Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority, which is based in Wellington. They hear and rule on appeals to decisions of the DLC, such as licence applications. But they also deal with appeals to the making of an alcohol policy that the council may make. So if the council makes an LAP and that is then appealed, then ALA are the organisation that deal with that appeal. So, as Julie mentioned, this has been a long journey to get to where we are. I won't go through each of these boxes in detail, but more just to provide a bit of an overview. This process started back in 2013 with an initial resolution to develop a draft LAP. We've held workshops, we've engaged with the community on many, many occasions. We've had 3 distinct drafts of the LAP with 3 separate consultation processes. And over the course of those 3 consultation processes, we've received about 150 written submissions and I think around about 40-odd oral submissions. So this has been an extensive process with a lot of community engagement. It's a policy that's never going to get unanimous consensus by its very nature, but there's been a very extensive engagement process throughout all of this. This is a summary, the 1-page summary that's appeared in every version of the LAP throughout the process. This is the version that was presented to the committee back in August last year. So it represents the most recent version that went out for consultation. I don't want to take you through the detail here, but more just to illustrate the bits of the policy where, for this report, we are recommending no change. So the bits in green are bits that we believe should be adopted without any further change, which, as you can see, represents the vast majority of the draft policy. The bits where we are recommending some further consideration is regarding to on-licences. So to take you through that now, in very, very brief summary form, the proposal where we're not recommending any further change for off-licences. So these are the bottle stores and supermarkets. We're proposing 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. are the maximum trading hours, no location restrictions, no discretion conditions. That's what was put out for consultation in August. For club licences, 8 a.m. to 12 a.m., again, no change. And special licences, while we say up to 24 hours, what we are saying is there's no specific hour limitation regarding special licences, reflecting their purpose for providing exceptions to ordinary trading. Where we are proposing some further consideration is around on-licences, and what we've developed is not a recommendation per se, but rather 2 packages for the council to consider. So we dubbed these 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. as a convenient label. The 2 a.m. package, in both cases these are having an opening hour of 8 a.m, but the 2 a.m. package would have the closing hour for hotels, taverns and Class 1 restaurants as 2 a.m. Function centres would close at 1 a.m. and all other on-licensed premises would close at 12 a.m. There would be no location restrictions, which is again something we've consistently recommended throughout. No one-way door restriction and no discretionary conditions. So it's effectively a 2 a.m. closing time as the latest trading hour. The 3 a.m. option is what was put out for consultation back in August. To remind you, closing hour for hotels, taverns and Class 1 restaurants is 3 a.m. with a one-way door restriction for those venues from 2 a.m. The closing hour for all other unlicensed premises would be 1 a.m. and again, no location restrictions or discretionary conditions. There are obviously variations within these options. For simplicity's sake, we're not going to explore every possible variation, but happy to take questions about any particular alternatives that you may want to explore. The basis for all of these options, because of the nature of our consultation throughout, we believe means that if council wants to pursue and adopt one of these options, no further consultation would be required. But obviously, if you go into alternative options, then we would probably have to reconsider whether consultation has to be further undertaken. And happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Peter and Julie. So we'll go into questions. First, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Peter and Julie. And yes, this has been going on as long as I've been on council, so let's hope we're getting somewhere. My questions aren't really about the proposal, they're about the policy, the development of the policy that's got us to this place now. So over our 3 goes at this, how many submissions have we had?
So in total, over the 3 iterations, 150 written submissions and approximately 40 oral submissions.
And how are those, that full amount of submissions, how are those reflected in the report today?
We've taken what you might call an iterative approach. So the general thrust of arguments that have come through all of those rounds of consultation hasn't changed. The arguments against a given proposal are reasonably consistent across all those forms of consultation, and similarly for those in favour of a particular proposal, the arguments generally remain the same. So we haven't seen any sort of violent changes from one round of consultation to another. It's really just reflecting the changes that we've made at each stage.
Okay, thank you. So you talked in your report about the appeal procedure, and my understanding of that was that it's only people who've submitted to this draft can appeal. So how does that enable people who've submitted as part of the broader process to engage in the full process through to the appeal?
It's one of those areas where we've been unable to get clarity around how people who have submitted on a previous iteration of the draft LAP are treated. As a result, at every stage we've strongly encouraged and actively promoted people to make a submission, even if they made a submission on an earlier draft, to secure their appeal rights. Ultimately, it would be up to ALA as to whether they accept an appeal from a previous round of consultation. But that's beyond our scope to influence and control at this stage.
Because we had substantially fewer submissions to round 3 than we did to round 2. Many of the people who submitted to round 2 did not submit to round 3. Do you want to hazard a guess as to why that was?
Sorry, Peter. Sorry, is that a genuine question or a rhetorical question?
No, absolutely. I think there is a definite fall-off between the two. As Peter's just said, we encourage people to continue to submit, but some people chose not to submit between round 2 and round 3. And I think there's a risk there that we have people who are now not going to be able to participate in the full process. So I wonder why they were aware of that, and why did they choose not to participate?
The level of engagement we saw from some of the social media statistics shows that it was comparable. It's not identical, but it is comparable. So I think we had still a reasonably good reach, and we took the same approach with the in-person, in-community community drop-in sessions that we ran. So I think we did as good a job as we were able to do in terms of reaching people. As to speculating as to why it dropped off, I hesitate to do that. One possible explanation is simply fatigue. People feel they've been asked the same questions many, many times over, and they feel unlikely to affect the outcome if they make a further submission.
I think it's also important to add that, given that this is a reasonably polarising, often issue, that the interests of submitters in this group and the interests in, of submitters in this group, the sorts of submitters who are likely to appeal are probably their views will be represented by one of the most likely parties to appeal, which tend to be the bigger organisations who are submitting as a matter of course in LAPs around the country.
Yeah. Okay. Madam Chair, I do have a list of questions, but I'm aware that others probably do. So I'm happy to hand over and come back if I still have questions left.
Yes, I do have a long list of people. Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for your report. My questions are mostly around off-licence premises and particularly trying to understand the officer's recommendation to not to propose any change with that. And in particular, given the strength of argument in some of the submissions in this last round and the evidence that was provided, I guess it would be good to get a bit of a further understanding about why you're not recommending any changes. The research that's referred to on page 19 in terms of the Cameron, Cochrane, Gordon and Livingston research that shows that sort of fairly direct correlation between the number of off-licence premises and alcohol-related harm. How much was that considered in the officer's consideration?
Yeah, so the research that Michael Cameron carried out was something that we've had access to right through the development of the process. We spent quite a bit of time in, I think it was development of draft 2 or possibly even draft 1, looking at that, and I did work with some researchers from Massey University to try and understand the impact of that. One of the concerns we have is that the data that they collected for Palmerston North presented some, what you might call, curious outcomes. So, for instance, identified that the area of the city, the census area unit of the city that had the greatest risk of additional licences was in the Milson CAU, where currently there is only one licensed premises. And the research was suggesting that for every additional licensed premises in that area would be responsible for another 5 violent incidents. So it's one of those exercises which was undertaken in a theoretical basis, but when applied in a real-world context, creates some strange outcomes. Meaning, if you were to look at Milson, that's not where the greatest problems are being presented in our city, in terms of alcohol-related harm, when you look at how the city operates as a whole. So one of the things that the research concluded is that it does need to be considered, their research outcomes, in the context of local knowledge, and we looked at that research and found that taking the same approach that had been applied through the rest of the country doesn't necessarily hold true when looking at the compact geography of Palmerston North. Because we have such a compact geography, putting in particular location restrictions can have some perverse outcomes. Meaning when you put in a restriction, for instance, in the suburb of Highbury, the surrounding suburbs are not so far away that boundary effects can't be detected. Meaning, if you prevent new premises being placed in Highbury, that you can't easily access alcohol from Awapuni or Takaro or other neighbouring areas. So the research from Cameron is interesting. It does provide a sort of a launching off point for us to look at those location restrictions, but ultimately we found that it didn't really stack up in our situation here.
Okay. Just further down that page, it talks about the exploring a per capita cap on off-licence premises. I'm just wondering if that was to be applied and which part of the policy would need to be amended to accommodate that.
So the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act has a provision that a policy can include a provision as to whether further licences should be issued for all or some licence types, and that's where you would have a per capita approach. We don't have that in the policy because the policy doesn't propose to limit the issuing of further licences, so that would be a completely new section to be added into the policy.
Okay. Thank you. Just going to page 20. Oh, no, actually going to page 27. Oh, no, just... sorry. Oh, so where the options are looked at in the paper, the two options on page 22, sorry, it's a little bit all over the place. So under the discretionary conditions on page 22, there are two options that were considered in that first paragraph there, to include one or more discretionary condition or to include no discretionary conditions. And the officers have recommended not to include any, but I'm just wondering what the one or two discretionary conditions that were considered to be included were.
Sorry, it wasn't that we were considering one or two or three or four discretionary conditions. It's simply stating that you had the option to include discretionary conditions or not. And if you have a discretionary condition, it could be 1, 2, 3 or 100, however many you believe are necessary.
Okay, so some of the submissions talked about proximity to high deprivation areas and also proximity to sensitive areas. If those were to be included, would those be discretionary conditions?
You can include them as discretionary conditions, or you can include them as location restrictions.
Okay.
If they're included as discretionary conditions, it's entirely within the discretion of the DLC as to whether or not they're applied.
Yep.
And that's been the fundamental reason why we haven't recommended any discretionary conditions. Currently, the DLC have the ability to impose those if they believe they're a reasonable condition.
Okay.
Whether they do or not is their choice.
And that comes to my next question, actually, because it talks about the fact that the DLC can consider various things when they make those decisions. But how is that informed if it's not included in the local alcohol policy?
So there are a number of ways that can happen. The DLC, when considering the application, if they believe there is a particular risk to be mitigated, then they can identify an appropriate condition to apply. That also could be identified and suggested by any number of the reporting agencies, which includes the Medical Officer of Health, New Zealand Police, or the licensing officers. So when those reports go with a particular application to the DLC, they could include recommendations for those conditions to be applied.
Okay, so if
Excuse me, Councillor, I've got a large number of councillors waiting to ask questions, so would you like to just take a pause now and we'll...
Sure.
Around? Thank you. The Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just teasing out a little bit more what Councillor Naylor was talking about, but they're actually, with the off licences, the hours that you are proposing are actually different. What are the current hours?
The current default maximum hour is 11 p.m.
Right, so it is changed, because I think there was a question there that was asked, and we are significantly changing them, aren't we?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So it's different. It will be different to what's currently there at the moment.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So just on that discretionary conditions or sites, because we do get barreled a little bit around, you know, bottle stores opening near sensitive sites, schools, you know, and you said that the agencies can influence the DLC, but it'd be fair to say they're all not aligned. I mean, they give different advice. All of them do. Would that be fair?
I wouldn't like to comment on whether the agencies are aligned, for obvious reasons. But yes, I mean, the ability for the DLC to be lobbied, I guess, by those agencies on those conditions certainly does exist.
I suppose what I'm saying is a pretty weak set of tools, really. We'd be better off to put some discretionary conditions around sites and just make it really clear.
Like I say, the discretionary conditions, simply including them in the policy, wouldn't necessarily have any greater impact than the current tools, because they are discretionary.
But they would be clearer?
I would contend that they're not any less clear right now. I think it's simply a question of whether you put them in the policy or not.
Okay. All right, I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you just refresh me? My memory's not that good, I suppose, but how long is it since we first started looking at our draft local alcohol policy?
Councillor, that was covered in the presentation already.
Yes, I would like to just go there, please.
Okay.
So the initial resolution was 2013 and work began in 2014.
Okay. Was there any work done prior to that?
In terms of an alcohol policy, the local alcohol policy, no.
There was nothing. So we had no policy in the City Council whatsoever as far as an alcohol policy goes?
Not in terms of licensing, no.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine relates to the sensitive sites, and in the submissions it's noted around some suggestions of definitions, but you've got, if we had an option around a sensitive site, we'd still have to do a suitable definition. And so I'm just wondering how practically best are we if we were wanting to go down the sensitive site rather than having no location restriction, a suggested process to do that, or are you just looking for recommendations from members to shape that?
If you were to move in the direction of having location restrictions around sensitive sites, we would be looking at producing a new draft for consultation. Because we haven't foreshadowed that in any of our consultation prior, that would be a basis for further consultation. If that were to happen, then we would be looking at doing further work on developing what sensitive sites would be included. Other councils that have gone on these directions have included such things as early childhood centres, schools, in some cases I believe churches or other community group facilities. The extent to which you want to include or exclude those, I think it needs to be explored. If you make that group fairly significant, there is a potential to exclude a significant portion of the city from being able to have a licensed premises located next to it.
Just on that a step further, if in the commentary around the recommendations on page 38 of our order paper, it's got, otherwise we could simply require the District Licensing Committee to have regard to the proximity of the new premise to sensitive sites. And that's a very loose term. I just wondered what was intended around having regard, and interested in your comment on that.
So yeah, that was something that was raised by a submitter. It may have been Alcohol Health Watch or Te Herenga Hauora. It is arguably a weaker form of a specific location restriction by saying that the DLC must have regard to it. In practical terms, any LAP is only for regard by the DLC. It does not bind the DLC to make any particular decision. So you could argue that it actually isn't any less weak than a specific location restriction, but possibly it's couching it in softer terms so that it's seen as giving the DLC a bit more capacity to explore alternatives.
And finally, Madam Chair, just in regards to the one-way door policy, there were some submissions that were opposed to the adopting that approach. If we were to keep the 3 a.m. close time with the either-or option of 2 or 3, 3 has the proposal of adopting that one-way door policy. If we were to remove that as part of that time proposal, would that need to be reconsulted, or is that acceptable?
I would argue that that probably doesn't require further consultation because it has gone out on that basis, and we've had the ability to receive views from the community about one-way door restrictions in that context. Option 3 a.m. without a one-way door restriction is as close to a status quo right now as we could imagine. It is slightly different because we do have the 1 a.m. restriction for other licensed premises, but it would be very close to a status quo approach.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor, I still have a long list of people wanting to ask questions, so just try and keep them concise, please. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we started the discussion on this in 2013. It's now 2021. If this ended up getting passed today in one of those forms, how long would it be before it came back as a review?
That's a very good question. I couldn't give you a specific time frame. What I would note is that, unlike many of our other policies, this is subject to an appeals process that gets taken out of our hands effectively. There has been some data found in the past few years that suggests that the process for completing a policy through the appeal stage can take anything up to 2 years. I wouldn't expect it to take that long now. ALA's dealt with most LAPs from different local authorities. But potentially this could take a further year before it actually becomes back to council for bringing into force. And if that would be the case, then we're looking at 2 years after that before they'd be bringing it back for review.
Okay, thank you. That's been very helpful.
Peter, I just have a question myself, which is, can you give us a sense, because we're quite late as a council in producing this draft LAP, can you give us a sense of how it sits compared to the others that have been passed in terms of its restrictive nature or its permissive nature?
That's a very good question. It's hard to assess without going through all the other 60 or so policies that may be out there. I think it's about 40. I think in some respects we are fairly modest in our proposals. We certainly aren't the most restrictive out there. Other councils have more, you might argue, comprehensive policies with location restrictions and discretionary conditions, which we haven't included in the drafts to date. The hours, 9 p.m. would be probably as restrictive for off licences as any part of the country. 2 a.m. would be comparable with most other councils where they have restricted on licences. But other councils have gone further, for instance, with opening hours being restricted as well to, say, 10 a.m., which is bringing it slightly forward as to when you're able to open your licensed premises.
Thank you. Councillor Meehan. Sorry, is your microphone on?
Thank you. Just following on from an earlier comment you made in regards to locations, and you made the comment around one in Highbury, if it wasn't there, they could go to Takro quite easily. Do you not see that if somebody was able to walk 50 metres up the road to a location, as opposed to having to get into a vehicle to drive 3 or 4 kilometres or walk that 3 or 4 kilometres, might deter them from going for that extra distance?
Yes, when you look at walking versus driving, one of the things we did look at in an earlier version when we were doing the initial research for this was maps which showed the walk and drive times and the coverage of existing licences. And we used the basis of a 15-minute walk or a 5-minute drive. And that showed that there's almost nowhere in the city where you couldn't walk within 50 minutes to get to a licensed premises, meaning there's very broad coverage throughout the entire city. Yes, you could argue that any restriction which makes it harder to get to alcohol is something to be favoured if you're trying to restrict access. But what we would say is the way that the city is structured makes it very easy, even without whatever time frame you set, to get from one area to another, compared to other larger cities where having a vehicle is almost mandatory to get to another part of the city. Palmerston North is a very walkable city, and that makes a lot of those boundary restrictions harder to justify.
Okay, and just a second question was around locations again. You said that you didn't see the need to put in around sensitive sites or any restrictions around sensitive sites or so on, play areas, schools. The reasoning behind that?
So with sensitive sites, when we looked at this, there were some things which seem on the surface to make sense, but when analysed in practice, kind of fell short. So there's a couple of examples, and one I draw on from my own personal experience. So I have a daughter who goes to a daycare, which is located within 100 metres of a bottle store. But in practice, very few children walk to that daycare, most of them are driven, and they go nowhere near the entrance to the bottle store. The bottle store has no negligible external advertising, and I have to confess from my own personal experience, my 3-year-old daughter has no idea what they sell there. So the exposure in terms of the normalisation of alcohol in that particular scenario, to take as one example, it kind of undermines the argument as to why you might justify having a restriction on location based on sensitive sites of that nature.
If I can just add too, it's not necessarily that staff don't think there is a case to be made there, it's just that it has to be a case. This is an evidence-based policy in terms of how the legislation is structured. So it's not just that we would need to show that, for example, elected members wanted it to be part of the policy. We would need to provide evidence that there was a reasonable justification for that restriction, or else it would be easily challengeable.
Would evidence not be able to be gathered if you were to place it in, and if the results came through as positive, it would stay? If not, when a review came up, it could be changed.
No, so what Julie's suggesting there is, to take my example there, if there was evidence of alcohol-related harm occurring in that space, in that location, related to the sensitive site that we're trying to protect and that venue, then we'd have a justification there for making a policy restriction. And what we're saying is at the moment we don't have that evidence to support that.
Thank you.
Councillor Bowen, you've got further questions?
I'm back in. Yes, thank you. Some of mine have been ticked off, you'll be pleased to know. So probably following that line of discussion, in your report on page 17, you talk about the frustration of the need for local evidence. So just remind us why local evidence matters in this context.
So in the early days of LAPs, when ALA was considering appeals, they made a very clear ruling that when making decisions about local policy situations, it needed to be supported wherever possible by local evidence. So that's been set as a very high bar in the development of this policy. A number of submitters have furnished us with national or international research in support of their arguments, and ALA do admit that sometimes that can be useful, but most of the time that's useful in context and in providing a broader understanding of the issue. Our problems are not that there is no harm in the city, but that the evidence of it and the relationship of it to the policy options that we have before us is not strong, and that's been the handicap we've been working with.
So to be clear, somebody submitting to say that their experience is that something causes harm isn't evidence of that being harm?
To use a phrase that's become fairly commonplace, we've described that as anecdata. It's useful to know, and we always do take that stuff into account. But in terms of the quality of evidence that we need to support a whole-of-city policy, I think we would want to see something a little more robust than that.
And just to come back to a comment I think Julie made in answer to one of the previous questions, is that we know there's a certain group of people who are very likely to appeal any local alcohol policy. It's happened all around the country. So how does our draft reflect the learning of that, or does it not? Do we just go, oh, well, if you're going to, bring it on?
Well, we certainly don't draft a policy to sort of stymie an appeal. We put the policy forward based on the best evidence that we have, and we respond to any appeals that come forward as a result. I think the submissions from Foodstuffs and GDL, who represent Progressive, are indicative that they probably would appeal if the council was to propose a 9 p.m. restriction for off-licence premises. But I certainly can't speak for them because it's up to them whether they would make an appeal.
Would you see the same likelihood if we were at 10 p.m?
I can only go based on what they put in their submissions. Of those two major supermarket chains, when they made submissions in the previous draft, the 2019 draft, they seemed to be more supportive of 10 p.m. than any further restriction.
Thank you.
And just to add, I guess as Peter has sort of foreshadowed in the report, the willingness to court appeal is a political decision rather than an officer one. So we've laid it out there in terms of the likelihood, but we can't make a definitive statement as to whether that's going to happen, and good luck with that.
I don't think we'd use the phrase court appeal, but yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Naylor, you still got some questions you wish to ask? No. Sorry, is your microphone on? We can't hear you.
Sorry, just turning to page 28.
There's a comment there under the options, number 3, that talks about, once again, this is off-licence premises that I'm focusing on here. It talks about a cap on the total number of off-licence premises, and then it says there's this type of cap could be further focused on off-licence bottle stores. And I guess the definition includes supermarkets and bottle stores in terms of off-licence stores. So if there was to be a restriction or a cap, what would be the mechanism to focus that on bottle stores rather than supermarkets?
So there are what they call business categories within licence types. So the business category of bottle store or wholesaler would be the one that we would use there to focus that restriction onto that type of business. So you could have a restriction only on that type as opposed to off licences generally, and that would mean supermarkets wouldn't be bound by that same restriction.
So once again, in which part of the policy would need to be amended to incorporate that?
That would be a new section of the policy. Currently, because we haven't proposed any restrictions on the issuing of further licences, there would be a new section of the policy that we would create, and we'd be recommending further consultation if you were to go in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, we are finally at the end of the questions. So thank you so much, Peter and Julie. Councillors, my read of this is that we need to, if we agree to, pass 1 and 2 before we then move on to 3 and 4, because we need to decide what options we're going to before we adopt them. So, as a start of a 10, I will move the first recommendation, which is that the following policy guidelines of the draft LAP remain unchanged, and then they're all listed. And I will move the 2 AM option, which is 2, B, C, and D. And I'll look for a seconder. Okay, seconded by Deputy Mayor.
Can we take those individually, please? Or 2.3 especially?
Well, we'll have comment on them, and when it comes to the voting, we can certainly separate them out, yes. So we'll invite... Sorry? Yeah, the 2 AM option, which is 2, B, C, and D. Yeah, that's right. So I will kick us off with that, and we'll see where we get to. So my judgment, I suppose, in all of this is that the 2 AM option and the other relatively small restrictions that have been suggested by the officers represent a reasonable attempt at a draft local alcohol policy. I'm not inclined to go for the 3 AM option because I believe that the one-way door was not supported really by anyone, and that taking out the one-way door would really, as the officers explained to us, effectively just endorse the status quo. So I do support, as has been described, modest restrictions coming in through this local alcohol policy. And I think I certainly would not be supportive of any further amendments that resulted us going out for yet another consultation, because I think has been well traversed and people are already a little fatigued by the consultation. So I believe the time has come to make a decision, go for the modest options that have been proposed to us and take it from there. Deputy Mayor, did you wish to comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, I found this process, probably like many others, particularly frustrating because I don't believe we have a huge amount of opportunity to create a lot of change in regards to reducing the harm that alcohol causes our community. What has been presented to us by way of these 2 options from staff is I think evidence of that there is really reasonably small amounts of opportunity to change things. And I believe that the option in front of us is going to make the most positive impact on our community, which is why I am more in favour of that. I think the submission process, Councillor Bowen had some questions around people coming back and back for further submissions, and I think we saw a drop-off because there was probably a bit of fatigue in this space with our engagement, and it was particularly frustrating at the lack of strong evidence that came through from our local police and DHB, who would be the people working in this space the most. And the fact that we don't have strong evidence collected that is specific, relevant, timely, really does put us in a position where I think our response is perhaps not as strong as some of us may want it to be. So I do think that the 2 a.m. option, as it's called, is a compromise that weighs up the limited evidence that we have been given and the willingness of the council to reduce alcohol harm. So that is the option that I will be supporting today. Thank you.
Councillors, I'll just give you a heads up that we've got 3 amendments coming through from Councillor Naylor, I believe, that would result, I believe, in us needing to go out for consultation again. So while the officers are typing them up, I will continue with comment on the recommendations 1 and 2 as moved, and then once they're typed up, we'll show you them for discussion, if you're happy with that as a process. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've heard clearly from the officers that they say that this started in 2014. Well, I remember coming back from the local government conference in either 11 or 12, Councillor Gordon Cruden, Tangi Utakeri, Pat Kelly and myself. And we had all attended the government presentation on what was then promised as the local alcohol policy. And we asked our officers then to look into doing it. We were the second council in the country to start it, the second. I hear today that we have looked at 60 other policies ahead of us. We were the second, now we're, 62nd? I've seen the policy from what we had with the pressure from the alcohol barons, if you like, and their lawyers force us and see councillors back down and change our minds so many times since we first started this. We've got a Clayton's policy now, I think is the best way to describe it. There are 1 or 2 small changes, but woe and tide to anybody who dare takes on the beer barons. You need the money, the time, and the patience. This is disappointing, but at least it's something, I suppose.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The irony of discussing a local alcohol policy on St Patrick's Day is not lost on me. I will not be supporting the 2 a.m. option, and colleagues, I'd ask you to also not support this, and I'll give notice that should this fail, I'll be moving the 3 a.m. option without a one-way door. I have several concerns with where we're at today, and I recognise the difficult situation the officers have been in with this as this discussion has grown over time. The report that we're receiving today only includes the most recent submissions and analysis on those, and I take the officer's point that there was nothing particularly new in that, but the effect of that is it excludes many of the people who submitted through this process from the appeal process. And we've had similar conversations around this, most recently in the Huia Street Reserve discussions, where the issue of fatigue, submission fatigue, was raised with officers. I remember specifically asking the council's officer at that point how we would make sure that those submissions were brought through the process, and was told at the time that that was just best practice to make sure that happened. But at the time, we thought a belt and braces approach would be sensible, and we passed a resolution of this council to ensure that submissions were carried forward from one part of the process to the next, particularly to avoid exactly this situation where people's appeal rights have been rendered null and void by council process. That is a very real concern to me, particularly as the third round of consultation went out with the 3 a.m. status quo. And it's my belief, anecdotally supported, that many of our bars didn't submit because they thought the 2 a.m. was off the table. They thought they'd been in and submitted to that, and we decided to stick with 3 a.m. And that's why they didn't submit. And they didn't submit, and now they have no right of appeal. That does not seem to me to be good process. It seems to me that that's not dealing in good faith with our community. I could go on. I'm not going to, because I suspect other people have some similar concerns. Of course, there is clear evidence of alcohol-related harm. Nationally, nobody is suggesting there isn't. That's what the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act is meant to deal with. We went through a legislative change there, and the restrictions in the Act deal to that. So we're asked to respond to our local situation. And as the officer has talked about, we respond to the local situation by looking at the local evidence that there is particular harm outside of that which the legislation was intending to deal with. And the officer's report says there are frustrations with the availability and quality of that local evidence. I don't think we've met the bar, pardon the pun, for that level of evidence. I think we'll open ourselves up, maybe not to appeal from our on-licences, because they're not the big players in this space, but they're members of our community and we need to hear their voice, and I think we've prejudiced them in this process. So I won't be supporting 2 a.m. I'll be looking for 3 a.m. without a one-way door, because there was no evidence, as the chair has rightly said, no evidence that a one-way door would reduce alcohol-related harm, and some anecdotal evidence and international evidence presented that it might in fact increase alcohol-related harm. So that's my position at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Madam Chair, this 2 a.m. option, which just is just a question to you, that's there. Are we also discussing if this is passed, does it bring off licences all zones to a 10 p.m. closing?
Yeah, so what we've got on the screen is recommendation 2, but I've also moved recommendation 1, which includes the off licence hours, which is 2.2.1 and 2.2.2, which is hours of off licence premises. It's just not shown on the screen.
Right, and that is to 10 p.m, is it?
Yes, as proposed. No, to 9 p.m. as proposed in the original.
Okay, all right.
So what we're doing at the moment is we're commenting on recommendations 1, which includes the off licences, and recommendation 2, the 2 a.m. option. Okay. Officers are also working on a series of amendments from Councillor Naylor, which have implications for further consultation, and are discussing how best to deal with those. So for the time being, we're just...
So we're just dealing with...
we're just dealing with 1 and 2,
one
B,
and
C
2.
And D. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, I'll comment if I can. Look, first of all, I just want to commend the officers. Although some members that have been here a lot longer than me have some frustration with it. The work in pulling this together and consulting with all parts of what is quite a regulated sector has been very good. My mayoral colleagues around the country might have been first off the rank or second or third, but they've got probably $1 million or $1.5 million worth of legal costs, as Dunedin had, in trying to push this through. So sometimes it's pretty good not to be first cab off the rank. I also think it provides a good basis of data, evidence in some parts, lack of evidence in others, but it's been pretty well socialised. I just want to talk about the off licences first. The bottle stores, the supermarkets. There was a huge amount of evidence that around preloading and alcohol harm. And it is courageous to bring it down to 9 p.m. because it is currently 11. That's sort of lost in the translation here a little bit. I think we absolutely need to do that. That is where the issue is. Less so with the on-licences, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I do support the 9 p.m. closing because I mean it was very, very clear. It was about the only part that did have a lot of evidence that that is where our issues are. With the on-licences, it's very regulated. Councillors know that. It is very regulated around the licence holder, the manager's licence, and all the other parts of running a licensed facility. But there was really little local evidence to say closing an hour was going to make a massive difference. I would also have to say the drop-off in consultation or submissions is because we went out with this blue thing here, which has got clearly 3 a.m. And I believe, and it's my opinion, I know, but I believe a lot haven't submitted because they actually think we're having a crack where all the evidence was and where all the talk was around the off licences, not the on licences. Now remembering, and I don't think the officer clearly articulated it when he was asked the question, all the metros are nearly at the default of 4 a.m. So we are going quite differently if we go down this 2 a.m. path to all the other metropolitan cities. There is also some unforeseen consequences, councillors. Your CBD could become a bit of a ghost town. It really could. And the real big one is the rowdy, unregulated house parties that will come if drinking at home. So people won't change their behaviours that much, they'll just move it somewhere else. So it's far better to have a regulated, on-licence sector that has big controls around it. We're already under the national closing, and we don't have any evidence, any real local evidence to say 1 hour more is going to make a big difference. We do in off licences, and that's why I'll support closing at 9 p.m. But I won't support this 2 a.m. and I'm very happy to roll to the 3 a.m. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Naylor, the staff advice is that your 3 amendments need to be taken individually rather than rolled up in one. Again, staff advice is that if any of these 3 amendments pass, it triggers a further consultation. So, with that, I'll give you your right to speak. And can we have the amendments up? Are you ready to do that? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can we just wait till the amendments are on the screen? We'll see which one we're talking about first. Okay, so these are all, I understand, amendments to recommendation 1. Is that correct? Yeah. Yeah. So this is the first of 3 amendments to recommendation 1 that Councillor Naylor has put forward. Yeah, floor is yours, Councillor Naylor.
Would you like me to speak to the other recommendations together or just to the amendments at this point?
No, let's just take them one at a time. I think that's simpler.
Thank you. So I'm largely supportive of what has been moved and seconded in terms of recommendation 2. These amendments that I'm proposing really focus on off-licence premises. About 75% of alcohol in New Zealand is sold in bottle stores and supermarkets. So 3/4 of the alcohol is really comes from off-licence premises rather than the online licence, which is only 1/4. 73% of heavy drinking occurs in private homes. So whilst there has been a lot of focus on licensed premises, I think the off-licence premises are really where we also need to focus if we're wanting our local alcohol policy to achieve the objective to actually minimise the harm caused by alcohol. And at the moment, I feel like some of the changes are a small way towards that, but some of the really compelling submissions that I read in this round of consultation gave me, I thought there was some really compelling evidence that caused me to think that we do need to reconsider our approach to off-licence premises. So the three amendments would be providing some more restrictions. So the three areas that I really picked up through the submissions, particularly through Nathan Cowie's submission, were in terms of restricting to high deprivation areas, restricting around proximity to sensitive sites, and then also the overall number of off-licence premises. And I'm not sure if other councillors are the same, but those are the issues that I'm hearing feedback from the community, where there are community concerns. It's about the location and it's about the number. I suppose the per capita cap, I'm probably speaking to all three amendments here.
No, can we just try and keep it nice and clean? Speak to one, we'll debate it, then we'll go on to the next one.
So the first one is to include restriction for new off-licence premises in high deprivation areas. So the evidence, particularly, I read there was 66 references in one of those submissions that referred to many, much of the research that was very consistent, which was really telling us that off-licence outlets have a consistent relationship with police events such as violence offence, antisocial behaviour, drug and alcohol offences, sexual offences and motor vehicle accidents. And that evidence was consistent throughout a number of the research that was quoted in those submissions. So from my perspective, that the high deprivation areas do have an unusually high proportion of off-licence premises per capita. Oh, sorry, that's probably one of the other amendments. But this one is trying to address that issue to provide some restrictions. And I think whilst the District Licensing Committee can make some decisions, I do think if we're going to have a local alcohol policy, it should actually outline the parameters that we expect them to consider when they're making those decisions. So I think it's important for us to outline that in the policy. I'm aware that it may trigger a further consultation, but from my perspective it's better to get it right. And why have a policy that's intended to restrict alcohol-related harm if it's not going far enough? So I think it's well worth our consideration to look at restrictions of this sort. So I'll leave it there for now for this first one.
Thank you. I have a question for you. How are you defining high deprivation areas?
8, 9 and 10.
Okay. Now I've got a lot of people in the queue who may or may not want to speak to this amendment. Councillor Dennison, are you in the queue for this, or as a general comment? Because we'll take general comments again later once we've dealt with this.
Okay. No, I would like to speak on this then.
Okay.
It's really unfortunate that we have to go around on another round of consultation, because we have deliberated on these type of issues before. And it's unfortunate that the horse is bolted in some of these cases, because this is what makes this issue resonate with me, because there's communities that I have connection with that have had bottle stores open up right in the middle of a shopping centre that was not wanted necessarily by a large portion of the community, but yet the results of that have ended up with people drinking from all hours of the day because they can get access to it, and drinking out the front of other shops where families with young children come in and connect with. And so therefore, how can we limit this type of reoccurrence in the future? And there's limited mechanisms bar to have limitations on the location restriction. And so this here would achieve that, and that's why I'm open to it. It's unfortunate we're going to have to take more time to get feedback on it, but I believe there's still a will amongst the submitters to kind of take this approach, so I would support it. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions. The first one is that if the recommendation triggers further consultation, would we be consulting on including the provision of the recommendation, or would we be consulting on the policy as a whole?
My intention is that if any of these three amendments passes, to adjourn and then take advice from staff as to how to proceed further with this policy at this time. Because my advice has been that any of the three amendments that Councillor Naylor has proposed, if any of them pass, that triggers a new consultation. And at that stage, I'm in uncharted territory, so I'll adjourn and take advice. Unless officers want to say something now about how we would proceed if one of these passes, if that helps your deliberation.
It does, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My advice would be that if any one of these three amendments were to pass, we'd also suggest that you make a resolution regarding the 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. option, and that creates a package that we will bring back as a draft for further consultation. So we'd need to take the information from all the resolutions that have been made today.
Sorry, I don't think you've got the microphone on, Peter. Would you be able to just press it on?
Yeah, it's on, yeah. I'll lean a bit closer. Any of these amendments that were passed, I think we would also want to see a resolution passed regarding the 2 a.m. or the 3 a.m. option as well, so that we can present a package policy for you to approve for consultation. So that would be a policy that says 9 p.m. for the off licences, 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. for the on licences, location restrictions, whatever that may be in terms of those amendments. It presents as a whole policy, and that policy is put out for consultation once again.
So the whole policy would be
Whole
consulted.
policy, yeah.
Thank you. My second question is for the mover, which is around the word restriction. What are you meaning by that? Are you meaning no licences, a cap of licences, sinking lid? What does restriction mean? Because that would be, if you were handing that to the DLC to apply as something to consider, I don't understand what restriction means.
I think it's around the proportionality of off-licence premises to the population. My understanding is that high deprivation areas have got a higher proportion of licence premises, and that is one of the contributing factors to the alcohol-related harm at the moment. So if an area, that would be my view.
So what is the restriction being proposed then?
I'm basing that on the advice that was given through the Health Watch submission, so it may be that a further advice. I'm not an expert on the technical, but I'm trying to, the advice that was given by officers was that there'd probably need to be some new wording put into the document, and I haven't got that wording here on the spot, but there would obviously need to be some work around that. So in principle, it's about proportionality to the population.
Okay, Madam Chair, would you like comments now, or are you just taking questions? Sorry, I'm a little bit unclear about where we're at in this process.
Fair enough. I had opened this up for comment, but obviously some people have got questions to the mover or to staff, which I've included in it. So if you'd like to make a comment, feel free.
Just a brief comment then. I absolutely support the intent of the recommendation, but I'm not going to support it because that recommendation in front of me doesn't tell me what is trying to be achieved, and it doesn't give any clear definition around what is actually going to be scoped out. And the second aspect is I'm not supporting a fourth round of consultation on this policy. We need to draw a line in the sand, make a decision, and then review it in a few years' time. But I'm not interested in going back out and asking people again what they think when they have told us several times.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor, are you aware that under our standing orders, if this amendment were to be lost, you wouldn't have the right to put up the other two amendments?
It's a standing order that hasn't consistently been applied, but I am aware it was applied once in the last 10 years.
Well, it is the standing order and I intend to apply it. So I'm just making sure that you're aware of that because you may wish to get someone else to move the other amendments for you if this one loses.
That might be an option.
Just to give you that option. So just to be clear, everybody, once we've dealt with this amendment, I'm intending to take an afternoon tea break. So that would give you the opportunity to canvass that if you wanted to do it. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to this amendment?
Yeah.
You are in the queue, but Councillor Dingwall is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I fully understand the intent behind this amendment. I live in a high deprivation area. I know how long it takes the recycling truck to get around my street, and I hear the clink, 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 clink everywhere, the whole way along. There is a massive issue with alcohol from off-licensed premises in my area. I get that. However, I think that this here is a blunt tool to solve that problem. Because what this here says is, if somebody wanted to open a supermarket in my area, which actually we kind of do need, they wouldn't be able to do that. And so I worry about the unintended consequences of this particular amendment. And I'm also very unhappy about having to go out and consult for the 4th time. This conversation started in 2013. We really, having an local alcohol policy that is not perfect, because it's a very blunt tool, is actually better than having no local alcohol policy. And how much harm is going to happen in the next 5 years before this comes back for review potentially, if we don't push go and actually get it done now. So I won't be supporting this amendment, sorry.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've heard it said that it's a blunt tool and doesn't offer any real guidance. I think it opens a door for us to examine and decide what we would consider restrictions should be. Also in line with Councillor Bowen's problem with those who had submitted and then not submitted to this one could come back in. So I don't think we should run away with a fear of going back to consultation. The actual alcohol issues along this line started back about 2011, I think. And we rolled on through that one. It cost us a fair bit of money. But the point being that we should not be fearing going back out to consultation. We've been that long now. If we have to go again, so what? We're better to get it right than to say, oh, we can wait a few years for a review. A few years, some pretty big problems can happen. Councillor Dingwall has said about the area she lives in and the problems. Well, I witness quite regularly those that suffer at the other end of the alcohol violence. And I think ourselves as council owe it to those people to take a little bit longer if we need to. So I'm in support of the recommendation.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to support the recommendation. I like Deputy Mayor, restriction, it is too vague. And I was also going to mention the supermarket issue. And just the previous councillor's comment about time, we have significantly reduced the bottle store times from, or off-licence, I'll be correct, off-licence times from 11 till 9 o'clock. Now that is, if we don't pass that today, that won't come into fruition till we've been out to consultation for another 5 years. So we believe that by reducing that to 2 hours, we're going to get a result. Otherwise, we wouldn't be bothering doing it. So we need to get that in so that we can get data so that we can get on with reducing it. This is a start to it. The other thing too is I can't see at this point, there's no evidence to say that a new off-licence in any of our 8, 9, 10 areas of deprivation is going to cause any reduction. There is no evidence. And at this point of time, just not allowing perhaps a new supermarket, all you're going to do is give a monopoly to perhaps 3 or 4 others that are already there. But my main concern is the going out again for consultation and not getting the gains that we've already got by this policy, and also getting the data in that we desperately need with police and DHBs need to start collecting this data from the 9 o'clock from when we put it out to public, so that we can say this is proven, then we can start using it in other ways and get some good results.
Right. I will go back to you, Councillor Naylor, for right of reply on this amendment.
Thank you. It's possible it may have been more helpful to take all three together, because they do have some connections, but one of the other amendments I am anticipating proposing is a per capita cap on new off-licence premises. And the issue of around the supermarket in a particular area that's been raised, which is a valid one, is able to be addressed through what the officers have identified on page 28, and I did ask a question about, where it says this type of cap could be further focused on off-licence bottle stores. So there are ways of imposing restrictions that would still allow supermarkets to be able to be built in new areas of development. Just to speak to that other issue for a moment, having a cap on a per capita cap does allow for growth, but allows for growth.
Sorry, Councillor Naylor, I've asked you just to stick to this amendment, so if you could do that, because we're running over time.
So the issue that was raised by another councillor I needed to address, and that was really addressed through the overall cap. So yeah, they are related to each amendment. So really, I guess, just in summing up for this, I think, our engagement policy, which we reviewed only very recently, requires us as elected members to be open-minded and respond to the feedback when submissions are made. I realise it's not ideal to have to reconsult, but my view is that if compelling evidence is put in front of us and we're asked to strengthen our policy by reputable people in our community with very good evidence behind us, I think we should be able to respond to that and do that. And this is one of the ways I think in putting this forward is responding to those submissions. And I'd encourage us to consider going further. At the moment, I feel like it's a little bit toothless.
Thank you. So with that, we will vote on this amendment to recommendation 1. Councillor Finlay, can you check your vote went through? Do I need to redo it? Okay, there seems to have been a system glitch, so we're going to take that vote again, please. Okay, let's vote. Sorry, the problem that we're having is the network is dropping out as people vote, so their votes aren't being registered. So we'll just try one more time. Otherwise, we'll go to a show of hands. Okay, so that has been lost, 7 votes against and 5 for, and 1 abstention. Okay, we will break now, adjourn for an afternoon tea break for 15 minutes and come back at 3:20. Kia ora koutou. Let's resume the Community Development Committee meeting. Thank you. So, we are considering the second of 3 amendments, and I understand that Councillor Bowen is now moving the second amendment, seconded by Councillor Meehan.
Doesn't matter.
That's not what it says there. Okay, so my advice is that it's better if Councillor Meehan moves it and Councillor Bowen seconds it, because of who's spoken to which amendment. Because Councillor Bowen has already spoken to the main motion, I believe. It doesn't materially change anything, just keeps it in line with standing orders. So the second amendment is to include restriction for new off-licence premises in close proximity to sensitive sites. So, Councillor Meehan, do you wish to speak to this?
Only that I think the argument's been had. I think if we talk about off-licence and we talk about supermarkets, I'd like to especially touch on. I think it's a totally separate thing. And I think as the restrictions come into play, I think people are quite clear that they wouldn't stop supermarkets going up in certain places that we're going to provide for people. But we definitely need to look at new bottle stores as and such, and the restrictions around them and where they are placed. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further members wishing to speak to this amendment? I've got no one in the queue. Great. Okay. Then we will take the vote. Oh. Deputy Mayor, you've just popped in the queue. Was that to speak to this amendment?
Just a brief comment that I won't be supporting this as per reasons already outlined. I'm not interested in going back out for consultation.
Thank you. So we'll now take the vote. Has that worked? Okay, that has carried. 8 in favour, 4 against and 1 abstention. So, what that means is that we now need to, we will need to go out for further consultation, but staff have asked us to consider, I think we should consider the third amendment, and then we'll consider a resolution around the 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. option, and then we'll need a resolution for staff to come back to us with a new draft. So let's go to the third amendment, which I believe is being proposed by Councillor Dennison and seconded by Councillor Finlay. So the third amendment to recommendation 1 is to include a new section in the local alcohol policy to impose a per capita cap on new off-licence premises with a specific focus on off-licence bottle stores. Councillor Dennison, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. You'll notice the additional sentence on there specific for bottle stores and excluding the supermarkets in this situation. With the per capita cap, that is whatever the ratio is now of the city's population against the number of off-licence bottle stores. If we have growth proportionately, it gives opportunity in line with the population, and I think that's a sound way of approaching this. It limits a flood of operators coming into our city, and so therefore I'm happy to move this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Advice from staff is that, as worded, the amendment wouldn't exclude supermarkets. Was it your intention to exclude supermarkets?
I'm happy to take advice on that. to ensure the outcome of what's intended. Is it possible, Madam Chair, through you, to seek comment from the officer to shape this for the outcome desired?
So what is your intention?
Is to, understanding through the questions earlier that there was different tiers of off-licence operators, and that there was a clear split, I understood, between supermarkets and bottle stores, and so therefore I thought that was going to be quite clear with the phrasing that we put up. How does this not give that clarity?
Because a specific focus on off-licence bottle stores doesn't exclude a focus on supermarkets. So if you are happy with that, that's fine. But if your intention was to exclude supermarkets, then it's not been achieved through that amendment.
Well, then maybe take that last line off and say on new off-licence bottle store premises. Would that achieve it, and take that last tag?
I will just check with staff if they're able to make a comment for us, please.
You happy with that?
Thank you, Peter. Are you able to provide some guidance?
If the intention is to have a per capita cap apply only to bottle store premises, then that wording that's on the screen now, I believe, would suffice.
Okay, thank you. Seconder's happy with the wording too. Thank you for that advice.
Thank you. Have you finished speaking to that now, Councillor Denson? Thank you. So, Councillor Naylor, you're speaking to this?
Thank you. Just want to thank Councillor Dennison and Finlay for bringing this very good recommendation forward, and I strongly support it. I think it addresses the, the concern that was raised by Councillor Dingwell earlier, where we wouldn't want to restrict supermarkets from being able to set up as we grow across the city, and they were included, obviously, as off-licence premises. So more the focus of the restriction, I think, is relevant to be targeted toward bottle stores. So I think that I'm very happy to support this.
Thank you. Just a comment from me, I won't be supporting it for two reasons. One is I feel that the recommendations that officers brought us originally were the ones that could be supported by evidence. And whilst I have some sympathy with the amendments that have been proposed, if there was evidence to support them, then they would have been proposed originally. And therefore, I can't think there's anything good going to come of putting these in without any specific evidence to support them. And for that reason, I will not be supporting it. Are there any further speakers? Okay, in that case, we will put the vote on this amendment. So that has been lost. 6 votes against, 5 for, and 1 abstention. Okay, so I think what we need to do to provide guidance for the next draft that's coming is to vote on the 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. option. The 2 a.m. option is currently moved, as are the balance of provisions in the draft under recommendation 1, apart from the one that has been amended by the successful amendment. So if we go back to that, okay, so the advice is that we should just look at recommendation 1 with the amendment as the substantive first. So if we can put that up, please. So if we can just have recommendation 1 up, please. That's okay. But I don't want 2 up because we're not discussing that just now. Okay, so what we're looking at now is recommendation 1 with the amendment that has been passed, but we still need to pass the substantive. Is there anybody that wants to speak further to this, or can we go? Not right. Can you not speak to this? No? Okay, I will let you, although you have already spoken to it, but go ahead.
No, just a question, Madam Chair. So this is off licence 9 p.m. closing. Is that what is? Because it doesn't say that anywhere.
Well, yes, it does. On the previous page, it does say hours of off-licence premises, but that proposal was 9 p.m.
Right.
So
okay.
it is the 9 p.m.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we've sort of done this to death, councillors, really. Can we just go for the vote?
Can we separate 2.3?
2.3? No, we're only doing recommendation 1, Councillor Meehan.
Oh, okay. It's in recommendation 1.
Okay, just hang on a minute. When you said you wanted 2.3, do you mean 2.3 within recommendation 1?
Yes.
You want that separate?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. You'll just have to give staff a minute to take that out then. Okay. We'll just take a couple of minutes.
And 2.4 also, Madam Chair.
Sorry, what?
And could you please exclude 2.4 also from recommendation 1?
I'll consider that, but just hang on a minute. We'll just need a couple of minutes, councillors, for staff to rearrange the recommendation in the light of the amendment that passed and to take the separation out for 2.3 and 2.4. So just give us a couple of minutes. Sorry, Councillor Meehan? Councillor Meehan, could you just... Oh, Okay, thank you. We'll resume. So, with recommendation 1, we've got that the following policy guidelines of the draft LAP remain unchanged. And under 2.3, it said, which is the location of off-licensed premises, which was the amendment that passed, it says as amended. Can we go to the next page? And it includes all of the provisions except 2.4, I believe. So we just flick back to make sure 2.4 isn't included. Yep. So that's excluding 2.4, which we'll vote on separately for Councillor Naylor. Okay. Right. So let's vote on what we've got on the screen, please. Not while voting's in place. So it's all of the previous guidelines, including 2.3, as amended. Councillor Finlay, have you voted? Okay, so that's carried 13 votes for and none against. And now we will take 2.4 on its own, which is that the following policy guidelines of the draft LAP remain unchanged. 2.4, discretionary conditions for off-licensed premises. So we'll vote on that one on its own. Okay, 10. Yeah, that's carried 10 votes for, 2 against and 1 abstention. So we will now move to recommendation 2, B, C and D, which has been moved by myself and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. We've already had a number of comments on this, so I don't really feel that there's need for more comment. Is anybody desperate to speak who hasn't yet spoken?
Madam Chair, can I just reiterate that if this fails, I'll look to move the alternate motion?
Yes. Okay, so this is the recommendation 2, the 2 a.m. option. So that policy guidelines 1.2.2, 1.2.4, 1.2.6 are changed to say the latest trading hour is 2 a.m. and that policy guideline 1.2.8 is changed to read for all other unlicensed premises, the latest hour for trading is 12 a.m. on the day following the commencement of trading, except for function centres, which the latest hour of trading is 1 a.m. on the day following the commencement of trading, and that policy guideline 1.4, one-way door restriction, is removed. So are we all happy to take these together? Okay, so let's vote on recommendation 2, B, C and D together then. And that is carried, 10 votes for and 3 against, no abstentions. Officer advice has been that we will need to request, we'll need to pass a resolution to request a report back to the committee as to next steps. And I would expect that that would include whether or not we need to consult. Did you want to give us some further advice, please, Peter or Julie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, based on the decisions of the committee, we would need to bring a new report, a new draft LAP, reflecting all of the decisions that have been made today. There would be further consultation required. The issue of location restrictions relating to sensitive sites is not something we've proposed in the past, so we would definitely need to give the community an opportunity to have feedback on that. The time frame is something I can't speak to at the moment. I believe the next meeting of this committee is May. Given the timeframes to produce reports, that may not be possible, in which case it would be going to the August committee.
Thank you. So I'm happy to move this. You're happy to second? And you've got an additional amendment, Councillor Bowen?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I've passed that to the officers, which is just to ask that all previous submissions in all of the draft LAPs that we've considered are referred to the next process, so that those submissions are captured, and that gives people access to a right of appeal should they wish to take it.
Okay. So you want to move that? I'm happy to second it, so we'll just give the officers a minute. Is everybody happy for these two to be taken together? Oh, sorry, Julie, did you need to give us some advice before we go further?
Sorry, it just might be useful to tell us what you mean by referred to. We can't make a submission on behalf of somebody on a new draft because their submission may not be relevant. We always contact previous submitters and invite them to submit on the new draft, but we can't just carry forward their submission because their views may have changed and they might not be making the points they would otherwise want to be making now.
Madam Chair, I might just ask through you if the Acting GM of Strategy and Planning might want to comment, because it's exactly the form of words we used for Huia Street.
But it may be that the proposal didn't change in the meantime, whereas this proposal has changed substantially every time we've gone out.
Well, the advice for Huia Street was that there'll be two separate consultation processes to follow for that, one of which will be a change to the legislation, which won't be our process. There'll then be a rezoning proposal. The advice was that we can, as staff, can look at those submissions in terms of how we put together the proposal, but we, in that case, for instance, the advice is the same as what Julie is saying, is that you can't just take a submission and then make it part of the RMA process. Those people would have to choose to submit. The comment at the time that I made was that when, as I said, when we're bringing that advice back, as officers, we would look at previous consultation as part of our overall advice to council, but we can't just make a submission to another process, which is consistent with Julie's advice.
Right. So if we said be considered in the next process.
Our practice is, given the long-running nature here of this process, is to contact submitters, tell them what we were up to, and invite them to submit, directly invite them to submit. We cannot make them submit, and we can't assume that they want their previous submission. I mean, they could tell us that they want us to just put it forward, but it wouldn't be accurate anymore because the draft has changed. So all we can do is encourage them to submit.
And make clear that if they don't, they won't have an appeal right.
It's always made clear as well.
Okay, then I'll
we did
withdraw
that in the previous process. in this latest consultation round, that was made clear to submitters. So if they've chosen not to submit, they are aware that they don't have the right of appeal.
Then I'll withdraw that. Thank you.
Okay, so that's withdrawn. So we've just got the Chief Executive report back on next steps as a result of the amendment to the draft local alcohol policy. So let's vote on that now, please. And that's carried, 13 votes for, none against and no abstentions. Great. Let's move on to item 9 on page 105. And this is the Palmerston North Safety Advisory Board Strategic Outcomes Plan, endorsement by Council, presented by Joan Ransom and our very own Patrick Hancock. Welcome.
Thank you. And here I have a second plan which is being brought to Council for endorsement today. As an accredited safe city, Palmerston North goes through a 5-yearly re-accreditation process. And the Safety Advisory Board coordinates the safe city activities and the accreditation process. This plan represents a year-long process and a significant rethink in priorities and the approach of the Safety Advisory Board. While I don't have a cheerleading squad like the previous report, the membership of the board includes decision makers of government agencies working within the city, including the police, ACC, Mid-Central District Health Board, Oranga Tamariki, Kāinga Ora, Mesa University, Education, Fire and Emergency, Defence, iwi and others. The Chair of the Safety Advisory Board, Pat Hancock, is here to present the report and answer any questions.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Joe, for the introduction there. I'll just make a couple of points first up, I guess. The first thing is, obviously, we want to present the strategic outcomes framework for adoption. And I just want to perhaps just cover off the fact that the plan actually aligns with the whānau ora approach to working with communities and uses the collective impact methodology. In other words, organisations that have very similar mandates can work together to achieve better outcomes in our communities. We have also consulted with the Whānau Ora Strategic Innovations Development Group, and the plan will actually then sort of provide us with 6 focus areas: youth resilience, housing, crime, health and safety. So from that, the next steps are that multiple working groups will be formed, and they will actually then co-opt NGOs, interest groups, relevant expertise, with a focus on co-design to support better outcomes in those focus areas. So the plan is actually at the moment just missing a mihi and mayoral message. So once adoption has been completed, those matters will be completed, and then we can actually move to the next area, of course, of forming those focus areas and working groups. So we really just want to adopt the outcomes framework so that we can progress to set up these working groups and move forward. The approach through the framework is around being flexible, permissive, and it's an invitation for the participating organisations to participate through collective impact. And the focus is really on the alignment of various organisations. There is, in the population experience, you can actually read some words in there which really sort of, I guess, underpins the fact that there is a direct correlation between deprivation and poor social and safety outcomes. So I just ask that this committee actually adopts the plan so that the Safety Advisory Board can move forward. Thank you very much. Take any questions.
Thank you, Pat. So questions with Councillor Bowen first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not quite sure if this is the right place for this question or the next portfolio report that you're presenting, Pat, Councillor whoever you are today. In the last discussion around alcohol-related harm, there was a discussion in the officer's report about the Cardiff model, which relied on a data-led response. And the suggestion through the officer's report was that something like the Safety Advisory Board might be the appropriate vehicle for this council to initiate that kind of work. Is that the kind of thing the Safety Advisory Board might be interested in doing?
Yes.
Would you need a recommendation from this committee to do that, or is that just something you can take back to them?
I think just probably we would take that back. I know that I have recently read a summary of the Cardiff project, and it's certainly something that we would actually want to actually look at anyway, so thank you.
Great, thank you.
I've just got a question around the, I guess, the scope of some of the areas. So in safety, it just seems to indicate road safety rather than maybe a wider feeling of being safe when you're out walking on your own or that type of thing. Is that covered somewhere else? Or because crime, I thought maybe it's under crime, but crime's family harm. So the outcomes seem to be very specific.
Yeah, the feelings of safety being in the public places covered under resilience.
Okay. Resilience, all right. And in terms of reporting back from the work now, are we expecting, say, an annual report back from Safety Advisory Board, or how will, once this is endorsed, how will the report back be?
Yeah, actually, if you have a look at the plan, there's actually a timetable which covers off various aspects of the plan, and it will go through sort of like preparation, advocacy, reporting, various actions, and it's all split into various quarters. And part of that is actually reporting back to this committee.
So that's where it just says develop, prepare, develop, implement.
That's correct, yes.
But where is the reporting back?
Madam Chair, within the terms of reference for which the Safety Advisory Board was established, there is a reporting requirement to report to the Community Development Committee at least annually.
Okay, so it's not in the plan itself,
No,
it's in the terms
it's
of, okay.
in the terms of reference.
All right, thank you. That's great. Councillors, any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for presenting. I'm happy to move the recommendation. Councillor Bowen will second. Does anybody wish to speak? Well, I'll just make some brief comments. I think this is a large body of work which has come to us perhaps late in a difficult day, but I do think it shouldn't go uncommented that the work of the Safety Advisory Board has really pivoted from being what you might have called a deficit model to being a much more holistic kind of a view of things and a wellbeing model, and I think that that's to be commended. I do think as well that it's a very collaborative approach, a little bit like the welcoming communities in that it's gone wide. It's involved government departments as well as community organisations, and it's something that, as the work finds its way through, will definitely enhance the feeling of safety in the city. So I'm very happy to endorse it. Okay, since there are no further comments, we will go to the vote. And that's carried, 12 votes for, none against, and no abstentions. So we'll now move on to item 10, which is the Safe City Portfolio Update, presented by Councillor Hancock. Councillor Hancock, would you wish to comment?
Madam Chair, if the portfolio report can be taken as read, I'll take any questions if there are any. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Hancock? No? Well then, I'm happy that we receive the report for information. I'm happy to move that. Councillor Bowen will second. Is there any comment? No? We will go to vote then, please. Councillor Finlay, have you voted? Okay. Okay, so it's carried 13 for, none against, no abstentions. Item 11, which is the Neighbourhoods, Villages and Rural Portfolio Update from Councillor Petrinus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just make a quick comment that the Bunnythorpe Community Centre is underway with completion expected in mid-July. If people will drive past there, they'll see that there is 4 steel portal frames that have been erected which really define the area of the hall. The Bunnythorpe Community Committee has also got a new chairperson by the name of Rebecca Mudford. So Bunnythorpe still is challenged by the roading issues of the Kiwi Frail Hub and the ring road, so there will be ongoing discussion with the staff and that. So, Madam Chair, I'd just recommend that the actual report be received.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Petrinus? No. So the Councillor Petrinus has moved his report. I'm happy. Oh, Councillor Hancock is happy to second it. Is there any comment? No. Then we'll move to vote, please. Councillor Denison, have you voted? And that's carried 13 votes for, none against, no abstentions. So next item is item 12, which is the People and Community Portfolio Update. The only comment that I want to make about this is that if you look at the report, you'll see the huge range of community events, meetings and engagement that occurs by members of this team. So I just wanted to say a public thank you to all of those who are taking part in engaging with this sector. And there will also be other elected members who have engaged in this sector who are not part of this portfolio team, whose names don't appear. And I think the very many levels of engagement are very commendable, so well done. I'm happy to take any questions, if there are any. No questions? So I'll move we receive the report for information. Seconded, Councillor Bowen. Any comment? Okay, we'll go to vote then. Thank you. And that's carried 13 votes for, none against and no abstentions. Brings us on to the last item, you'll be pleased to hear, which is the work schedule on page 159. General Manager, have you got any comment? Okay, are there any questions about the work schedule? No. Okay, I'm happy to move that we receive the work schedule. Seconded, Councillor Bowen. Any comment? Okay, we'll go to vote then. And that's carried 13 votes for, none against, no abstentions. That brings us to the end of community development. Ina mana, ina rea, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.